Robert David Bennett was born on Sunday, the 12th of September, 1875 in Hutchison Town, Glasgow, Scotland, the eldest child of David Bennett and Jane Borland. The Orient Company arrived in Sydney on June 4, 1886, carrying government immigrants. Upon arrival, the ship was immediately placed under quarantine due to an outbreak of measles. Despite the outbreak, the death rate was remarkably low, and the Bennetts were not victims of the outbreak. After settling in Sydney for some time, Robert got married in 1897 at Fremantle, Western Australia, to Elizabeth Steele. The couple had a daughter, Margaret, who was born in 1898 at Fremantle. By 1905, Bennett and his family resided in the Midland Junction district, close to Perth, where he worked as a painter. Known as Bob Bennett, he trained local football teams and served as the senior trainer for the Midland Junction Football Club during 1906 and 1907. Additionally, Bennett was quite prominent in boxing circles, managing local boxing matches in Midland Junction. Around 1910, a series of incidents involving interference with young children occurred in Midland. In June, a 9-year-old girl was attacked and brutally mistreated by a male assailant. She and her brother were walking through the grounds of the Church of the Ascension, near the Midland Town Hall, when a man approached and sent the boy away to get some candy. While he was gone, the girl was violently assaulted by the attacker. Although the police could not gather enough evidence for an arrest, they believed the perpetrator was likely a local resident. The name Bennett was frequently associated with these incidents, leading to his ostracism by his co-workers. However, since the only witness was the child herself, the Crown prosecutor concluded that arresting Bennett would be futile, as there was no corroborating evidence to ensure a conviction. Later, Bennett was caught attempting to lure another child into a secluded area by the child's father, who then gave Bennett a severe beating and ordered him to leave Midland Junction. Bennett temporarily left, but soon returned to commit the disgusting act for which he was ultimately arrested. On the evening of Saturday, 28th of January 1911, Bennett was observed to accost a young girl at the age of 10 in the vicinity of the town hall at Midland Junction. His actions were witnessed by Walter Hodges, the local postmaster, whose bedroom overlooked the town hall. As the child was passing, Bennett called out to her, "Come in here, dear, and I'll give you 6pence." The child took no notice and continued on her way. Later, as she was returning home past the town hall, Bennett called out to her again. This time she stopped. He took her by the hand and, resting his other hand on her shoulder, led her in the direction of the lavatory in the church reserve near the Midland Town Hall. Seeing this occur, the postmaster immediately telephoned the nearby police station, and Constable Walker hastened to attend. When he reached the reserve, Walker jumped the fence. As he approached the lavatory, he heard the child making a sound between a cry and a moan, followed by a man's voice saying, "Shut up, or I'll shoot you." The policeman pushed against the door, but was only able to open it a little way. However, he saw enough to leave little doubt that the man was trying to ravish the young girl. Walker called out, "Get up, you dog," and pushed with renewed force against the door. Eventually, he succeeded in gaining entry to the lavatory and saw that Bennett was fully exposed. When the policeman seized hold of Bennett, he pleaded for mercy and asked to be allowed to adjust his clothing, but Walker refused to allow it. During the scuffle, the young girl ran away. Walker took Bennett to the gateway, where he asked a passer-by to note his prisoner's undressed condition. Later that evening, a doctor examined the young girl and found signs of abuse. The doctor said the girl was mentally weak and might not be able to tell right from wrong. Despite this, she later testified at Bennett's trial. Although the girl had mental challenges, she spoke clearly, and even people used to court proceedings felt a shiver as she shared her story. Bennett was tried on March 14th and 15th, 1911, for having unlawful sexual relations with a girl under 13. After the prosecution's witnesses testified, Bennett took the stand. He said he was a painter and had a serious accident in 1898 when a block of wood fell on his head, leading to 7 surgeries for various issues. On the day of the crime, he claimed to have drunk a lot and couldn't remember what happened. A doctor for the defense testified that he believed Bennett was insane due to changes in his skull from the operations. The judge gave the jury special instructions on how to consider the insanity defense. After just 20 minutes, the jury found Bennett guilty. He was held over for sentencing later that week. Bennett was sentenced on March 17th. In passing sentence, the judge, Justice Macmillan, commented that the prisoner was guilty of a horrible offense and was not a person who ought to be at large. He passed the maximum punishment possible, that of imprisonment for life with hard labor. Justice Macmillan then added that he was required by law to pass a further punishment under a recent Act of Parliament called the Criminal Code Amendment Act. Bennett had committed an offence under Section 185 of the Criminal Code, for which the Act required the judge to pass an additional sentence of whipping. Justice Macmillan described this as a repulsive obligation, as he was sure a flogging would tend to increase Bennett's mental infirmity. However, the law allowed the judge to use his discretion. Macmillan had looked through the records for the past 10 years, and 9 strokes of the cat-o'-nine tails had been the minimum sentence he could find, so the judge directed that in this case the number of strokes should be limited to 9. Bennett listened to the sentencing in silence, and at the close of his honours address had to be assisted out of the dock. In 1913, Elizabeth and Robert Bennett got divorced. A later newspaper report revealed that Elizabeth filed for divorce because of Robert's affair with the young girl he had assaulted in January 1911, using much of the same evidence from the criminal trial. While in Fremantle jail, Bennett met another prisoner named Henry Donnelly, also known as Angus Murray, and they developed a close friendship. Donnelly had been convicted of burglary in Perth in April 1909 and received a 7-year sentence. He was released from prison in February 1914, and within 4 months, Bennett was also set free. Despite receiving a life sentence, Bennett was imprisoned for just under 3 years and 3 months. He was released in June 1914 with the approval of Thomas Walker, the Attorney General of Western Australia in the Scadden Labour government. Walker justified his decision by stating he had received petitions from various lawyers who provided medical reasons for Bennett's release. However, the main influence on his decision was a petition from Major Alfred Head, the Men's Social Secretary of the Salvation Army in Western Australia, dated April 27, 1914. Head proposed that after his release, Bennett could be sent to Melbourne, where Colonel Hoskins, head of the Salvation Army's social work branch, would help him find a job away from temptation. When Bennett was released on the 9th of June 1914, he was met at Fremantle Jail by Major Head, who put him on a boat bound for Melbourne, where Colonel Hoskins had promised to meet him on arrival. The newspaper report in Perth Sunday Times, which disclosed the details of Bennett's release, was scornful of the actions of the Attorney General. Referring to Walker as tender-hearted Tommy, the report suggested he had been led by the nose by the Salvation Army, and the army will do itself no good by interfering with justice in this manner. The writer also expressed concerns about saddling Victoria with a sexual maniac of such dangerous tendencies as Robert Bennett, and cast doubt on the capacity of the Salvation Army to keep Bennett under constant surveillance. The report concluded, "We do not allow lunatics from the eastern states to be landed here, but ship them back, and under those circumstances we cannot expect our eastern sisters to be more lamb-like and admit our moral refuse in the shape of a dangerous sexual maniac like the ex-painter of Midland Junction." When interviewed in Melbourne after his release, Bennett expressed himself as being very favourably impressed with the Salvation Army and the work it was doing for him. He added, "I am anxious to become a good citizen and am thankful for the chance which has been given to me." When a representative of Midland Junction's local newspaper, the Swan Express, phoned Major Head on July 15th, in an effort to obtain some insight into the reasons which had been advanced by the Salvation Army authorities to secure the release of the notorious Robert Bennett. The response from the major was less than cooperative, with Head's manner described as belligerent. Nevertheless, the full transcript of the conversation was published in the local paper. On Monday, July 27th, 1914, an indignation meeting was held at the Midland Junction Town Hall to address the early release of Bennett from prison. The meeting was well attended and notably unanimous. Attendees passed a resolution protesting the Attorney General's decision to release Bennett, who had been sentenced to life by a Supreme Court judge for a crime described as the most horrible and disgusting the judge had ever encountered. The opposition Liberal Party sought to take advantage of the controversy surrounding Bennett's release. On July 29th, the leader of the opposition, Frank Wilson, proposed a motion to censure Attorney General Walker. The motion stated that the advice given by Walker, which led to Bennett's release, was not in the best interest of justice and could undermine the protection of women and children under the law. After a lengthy debate, the motion was ultimately defeated. In December 1914, a man named Frank Dalton, the chief steward of the steamer Alinga, made the acquaintance of Bennett and Angus Murray, who were able to induce him to invest £300 in a proposed vaudeville theatre at Manly. The money was deposited in a bank in Sydney, and shortly afterwards the two men disappeared, together with the money. In February 1915, detectives arrested Bennett and Murray in Melbourne and charged them with having conspired to defraud Dalton of the money. Murray and Bennett were tried in the Central Criminal Court in Sydney on May 25th and found guilty of conspiracy to defraud Dalton. Bennett was sentenced to 12 months hard labour and Murray sentenced to 2 years hard labour, but an appeal was lodged against their convictions the next day. The appeal was heard in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 13th. The main basis of the appeal was that the Crown prosecutor had commented during the May trial on the fact that Murray had chosen not to give evidence on oath on his own behalf. The appeal was successful, the convictions were quashed, and a new trial was ordered. In early 1915, prior to their arrest in February, Bennett and Murray had undertaken another scheme to obtain money by fraudulent means. The two men had purchased a piano from Barrett and Company for £45. Some time afterwards, they reported to the firm that the receipt for the transaction had been lost and a duplicate was provided to them. Several days later, Bennett and Murray borrowed £20 from a moneylender, giving the bill of sale of the piano and a joint promissory note as security. Soon afterwards, they fraudulently resold the piano to Barrett for £30. When Bennett and Murray successfully appealed against their conviction for the Dalton fraud charge, they were further remanded in custody to face the Barrett fraud charge and a retrial of the Dalton charge. The two men were tried on the Barrett fraud charge on the 23rd of September 1915 in the Sydney Quarter Sessions. The jury convicted both accused men. Murray was sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment and Bennett to 3 months, both sentences with hard labour to be served in Bathurst Jail. On the 2nd of December 1915, Bennett and Murray were retried for the Dalton fraud charge in the Central Criminal Court. They were found guilty of conspiracy to defraud and were sentenced to further imprisonment terms, with hard labour, of 9 months Bennett and 2 years Murray. On September 18th, 1917, Murray and Bennett committed one of the boldest bank robberies in Melbourne in years. At around 3 p.m., Murray entered the Middle Park branch of the English, Scottish and Australian Bank, located on Canterbury Road across from the railway station. The bank was nearly empty, with only the teller, Harold Brooke, who was busy counting cash and updating the ledgers. Murray locked the front door, approached the counter, and pointed a Winchester rifle at Brooke's head. He ordered the teller to come to the public side of the counter and then tied him up and gagged him with strips of fabric. With the teller unable to move, Murray filled a bag with cash from the register and the open safe. When a clerk from a nearby bank knocked on the door, Murray quickly left through the back exit. He climbed over a fence into a lane where Bennett was waiting in a horse-drawn cart. Witnesses saw the two men leave the scene in the cart, heading toward St. Kilda. It was later found that they stole £541 in cash. Following the robbery, descriptions were distributed to Victorian police, and a close watch was maintained at the metropolitan railway stations. Police later concluded that Bennett and Murray managed to leave Melbourne by horse and cart, stolen from South Melbourne the night of the robbery. The two bank robbers then caught a mail train from a country station to Wodonga, arriving there at about midday on September 19th. At Wodonga, they engaged a car and driver to take them across the Murray River to Albury. They spent some time at the Globe Hotel before deciding to send a package of stolen banknotes to Sydney by registered mail. Meanwhile, the police in Albury had been informed about the robbery and were on the lookout for suspicious people. They noticed two men near the Globe Hotel acting strangely. One of them was recognized by Constable Cleaver as a known criminal. The police kept an eye on the men as they went in and out of the hotel. Bennett was seen entering the post office on Dean Street with a small parcel, and Constable Cleaver followed him inside. After Bennett handed the parcel to the postmaster, the constable arrested him and seized the parcel, which was addressed to a woman in North Sydney. The package contained about £380, including several £5 notes that had the same serial numbers as those stolen from the Middle Park Bank. Murray was also arrested, and both men were taken to the police station for questioning. When they were arrested, Bennett was described as a short, muscular man, while Murray was tall and thin. The next morning, both men were formally charged at the Albury Police Court. The court received Victorian warrants for their arrest, and the police magistrate ordered them to be sent back to Melbourne. That afternoon, Bennett and Murray were taken to Melbourne by mail train under police escort. On October 3rd, they were committed for trial for the Middle Park Bank robbery in South Melbourne. Bennett and Murray were tried before Justice Hood in the criminal court over 3 days, on 25th, 26th and 29th October 1917. They each pleaded not guilty and were undefended, but each at times cross-examined witnesses. After retiring for half an hour, the jury returned guilty verdicts. Justice Hood stated that he looked upon the two men as a pair of very dangerous professional criminals and considered it his duty to lock both men up for as long as he could. He explained that he was unable to declare the men habitual criminals, as that section of the Act only applied to persons previously convicted in Victorian courts, but he proposed arriving at the same result by applying another section of legislation, namely, by directing that they be detained in a reformatory during the governor's pleasure. He then sentenced both Bennett and Murray to the full penalty of 15 years' imprisonment, with the aforesaid possible extension of detainment after that period. On August 24, 1923, Angus Murray escaped from Geelong jail. On October 8th, outside Glenferrie railway station, he and an accomplice named Richard Buckley robbed Thomas Berryman, the manager of the Hawthorn branch of the commercial bank, who was carrying a case of banknotes. When Berryman tried to resist, Buckley shot him in the chest, seriously injuring the bank manager, who later died. On October 11th, police raided a house in St. Kilda where Squizzy Taylor and Ida Pender were living and found Murray hiding there. He was charged with the Glenferrie robbery, while Taylor and Pender were held for several weeks on charges related to helping Murray and living in a house known to be frequented by criminals. After Berryman died on October 21st, Murray was charged with his murder in company with some man, to the Attorney General unknown. Murray was convicted and sentenced to death. His case received a lot of public and political attention, and there were several appeals, but he was ultimately hanged on April 14, 1924, at Melbourne Jail, marking the last execution before the prison closed later that year. By June 1932, Bennett had been released from prison and was living at North Carlton, working as a painter and builder and using the name David Bennett. He was employed to carry out renovations to an empty house at the north end of Drummond Street, Carlton. On Sunday afternoon, the 3rd of July, 1932, a girl aged 4 years and her brother had attended Sunday school at the Methodist Church in Drummond Street. After the classes had ended, a witness named William Houston saw the girl and her brother walking along Drummond Street, and he also noticed a man, later identified as David Bennett, standing in the street. Shortly afterwards, the witness saw Bennett walking with the girl. Bennett had enticed the girl away on a pretext that he would buy her sweets. Bennett and the girl were seen to enter a house in Drummond Street with a "To Let" sign on the front window, the same house in which Bennett had been carrying out repairs. Later, Houston met the boy, who was obviously distressed, and said he was looking for his sister. Houston then went to the Sunday school for assistance, and he and a group of teachers, a man and 2 women, went to the unoccupied house. While they were banging on the door, Bennett pushed the child out the back into a side lane and then went to open the front door. He denied that a girl was inside, and as the group pushed past him, Bennett slammed the front door and ran into the street. The teachers and Houston chased him down and caught up. During the struggle, a plainclothes officer arrived, and Bennett was arrested and taken to the Carlton police station, where he protested his innocence. Meanwhile, the boy ran home to tell his mother about his missing sister. As she rushed to the scene, she saw her daughter emerge from a lane with blood on her face and hands and her clothes torn. The girl was later examined by a doctor at home and admitted to the children's hospital in serious condition, having been found to be shamefully maltreated. Bennett was charged with a capital offense against a 4-year-old girl and was tried in the criminal court on August 15th and 16th, 1932, overseen by Justice Wasley. The jury found him guilty, and the judge sentenced him to death, causing Bennett to collapse and requiring assistance to leave the dock. Bennett filed an appeal against the conviction, which was heard on September 5th. A panel of 3 judges dismissed the appeal, stating that there was ample evidence to warrant a conviction. Bennett was hanged in Pentridge Jail at Coburg on the 26th of September, 1932, at the age of 57. Before the execution was carried out, Bennett was asked whether he had anything to say. He responded by giving a lengthy and detailed statement lasting over 7 minutes, which covered aspects of his trial and appeal, as well as details about his conviction and release in Western Australia 20 years earlier. Speaking in a calm, unemotional manner, he claimed he had never done anything to deserve the extreme penalty, and that his hanging was to appease a vengeful public. When the sentence was carried out, Bennett's death was instantaneous. His execution was the first to be carried out at Pentridge Prison after the closure of Melbourne Jail in 1924.